The Great War was over. The Night King was dead. His army of the dead had turned to dust beyond Winterfell's walls. Snow still covered the battlefield, red with the blood of both the dead and the living. Jon Snow stood quietly at the top of Winterfell's walls, his sword, Longclaw, still by his side, but his heart heavier than ever. He had done everything right, fought with honor, protected the North, and even bent the knee to Daenerys Targaryen. But now, looking at the castle he once called home, something inside him whispered that maybe he made the wrong choices. Inside the halls, Sansa Stark sat beside the fire. Her red hair shimmered in the candlelight, and her face looked calm. But Jon knew her better than anyone. She was worried. They hadn't spoken much since the battle ended. Not properly. She had always been suspicious of Daenerys, and Jon had defended her every time. But even he had started to feel something was wrong. Daenerys had grown distant after the battle, cold. She barely smiled now, not even at Jon. All she spoke of was the Iron Throne, how Cersei must die, how people must fear her to obey her. Jon had tried to calm her, to remind her what they had just fought for. But she wasn't the same woman he'd once trusted. That night, after the feast had ended and the wine had run dry, Jon found himself walking the quiet halls of Winterfell. His feet moved on their own, and he wasn't surprised when they led him to Sansa's chambers. The door was open slightly. She was reading a scroll, her face serious. She looked up. "Can't sleep?" He shook his head. "Too much on my mind." She gave a small nod and moved aside, letting him in. He sat across from her, and for a while they didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward. It was warm, familiar. "You were right," Jon finally said. Sansa raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "Daenerys," he said, his voice low. "She's not the queen we need. She doesn't understand the North. She doesn't understand us." Sansa didn't smile. She wasn't the type to say, "I told you so." She simply looked at him and said, "I know." He looked at her, then really looked. The girl he'd grown up with was gone. In her place was a strong woman, brave and smart, with eyes that had seen more than most could handle. For the first time, Jon wondered if the person he should have trusted from the start had been standing beside him all along. Over the next few days, things changed, slowly. Jon stopped going to Daenerys's war councils. He spent more time walking through the North, talking to the people, eating at the long tables with the common folk. And Sansa was always nearby. People noticed, Arya said nothing, but she watched carefully. Tyrion gave Jon a few long stares, as if he were trying to read a book only half written. And Daenerys. Daenerys grew colder. She asked Jon one night, "Have you changed your mind about me?" He didn't lie. "I don't know." She stood still for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was icy. "You're not the man I thought you were." Jon felt those words like a knife. But deep down, he also felt something else, relief. He didn't belong at her side. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. One evening, in the godswood of Winterfell, surrounded by the old trees and snow-covered branches, Jon stood beside Sansa. The red leaves moved gently with the wind. "I don't know what happens next," he said quietly. Sansa looked up at him, her voice soft but firm. "Then we decide together." And just like that, Jon made a choice. Not for a crown, not for power, but for something he had long forgotten to value, trust. He chose Sansa, and the Game of Thrones shifted once again. The news spread through Winterfell like wildfire. Jon Snow was no longer at Daenerys' side. Whispers filled the halls. "He's been seen with Lady Sansa every day. He hasn't kissed the Dragon Queen in weeks. He's turning north again." The soldiers spoke of it. The servants knew it, and the lords noticed it. But no one dared say it aloud in front of Daenerys. She remained in her chambers, staring into the fire, like it owed her answers. Her face had grown pale, her eyes colder, and her dragon, Drogon, circled the skies above the castle more often than before, as if feeding off her anger. Meanwhile, Jon tried to find some peace in routine, training with the soldiers, helping the builders repair the damaged parts of Winterfell, and walking with Sansa through the snow-covered paths. There was something calming about being with her. No pressure to prove anything, No fear of saying the wrong words, just quiet understanding. One afternoon, as they stood watching a group of children build snow figures, Jon asked, "Did you ever think we'd come back here? After everything?" Sansa smiled a little. "I thought I'd die in King's Landing, or never escape Ramsay's cruelty. But somehow I always believed I'd see Winterfell again." Jon glanced at her. "You've become the North, and you've become part of it," she replied, turning to face him fully. "But she never will. You know that, don't you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to, but Daenerys did not stay silent. That night, during the feast held for the remaining soldiers before they marched to King's Landing, she entered the great hall like a storm. Dressed in black and silver, her face was unreadable. Jon was at the high table with Sansa, talking quietly. The moment Daenerys appeared, all eyes turned. She didn't walk to the high seat. She walked to Jon. "May I speak to you?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp as broken glass. Sansa's hand rested on her wine cup, not looking away. Jon stood slowly. "Of course." They stepped out into the corridor. The cold air met them as they walked past the guards, past the fire-lit torches, until they were alone beneath the shadow of the walls. "Tell me," she said, her voice low but trembling with fire, "is it love that's keeping you here, or duty to your precious North?" Jon didn't lie. He had no strength for lies anymore. "I don't love you the way you want me to. I tried, but my heart's not yours." Daenerys stepped back like he'd slapped her. "So it's her," she said. "Your cousin." "The Lady of Winterfell." He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. She laughed bitterly. "You betrayed me once by telling your sisters about your true name. Now again with your heart. Why do men always find ways to break what they promised?" "I never promised to love you forever," he said gently. "I promised to fight for what's right. That's all I ever did." She stepped closer, her voice turning colder. "Then fight with me. For the throne. We still have a war to win. I still need you." He looked her in the eyes. "You don't need me. You want me beside you so people won't fear you. But fear is all you're offering them now." Daenerys stared at him, breathing hard. Then she turned away. "Then I'll take the throne alone. And anyone who stands in my way, even you, even her," she paused, "will regret it." The next day she ordered her Unsullied to prepare for departure. King's Landing was next. Cersei would fall, and she wouldn't wait for Jon anymore. But Jon had made his choice. He stayed. Sansa met him in the Godswood again. This time there was no hesitation when she reached out and held his hand. "I won't pretend this is easy," she said softly. "But I'm glad you're here." "I belong here," Jon whispered. "With you." But the North was uneasy. They feared Daenerys would return with fire and fury. And soon enough, a raven arrived from Lord Varys, who had vanished after the feast. His words were clear. "She's going to burn them all. Cersei, the Red Keep, the city, women, children, innocents. She wants the world to kneel in ash." Jon looked at the letter, hands shaking. "She's becoming her father," Sansa said quietly. "The Mad King." And Jon Snow realized this wasn't over. The war was coming again, this time not for the throne, but for the soul of Westeros itself. The storm came faster than anyone expected. By the time the second raven arrived, Daenerys had already reached King's Landing. And she didn't wait for surrender. The letter was short, almost cruel in its simplicity. The lion refused. The bells rang too late. "Fire cleanses lies. The Queen of Ashes reigns now." Jon dropped the parchment. His hands felt numb. The bells had rung. That meant the city had surrendered. And still, she had burned it all. Women, children, innocent people, all turned to ash beneath Drogon's fire. Sansa read the message beside him, her jaw tight. "She's no queen. Not anymore. She's a tyrant. Just like her father." Jon said nothing. He just stared out the window. His breath was shallow. Arya, who had returned just the night before, looked at them both. "I was there," she said. "I saw it all. People screaming in the streets, running, burning. It wasn't war. It was murder." Sansa turned toward Jon. "You have to stop her." He finally looked up. "And if I can't?" Arya answered coldly. "Then I will." Jon knew then what had to be done. Not for power. Not for the North. But for the people, those who still lived in fear, those who might be next. But it hurt. It tore something inside him. Because no matter what she had become, He had once cared for Daenerys, and somewhere deep down, a small part of him still did. The next morning, he rode out, taking only a few men with him. Ghost followed at his side, quiet and alert. Arya rode too, silent, deadly, and ready. They didn't need a large force. They weren't going for war. They were going to end one. Meanwhile, Sansa remained in Winterfell, holding the north together with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes. She didn't cry when Jon left. She didn't beg him to stay. But before he rode out, she pulled him into a long, quiet embrace. "Come back to me," she whispered. "I will," he promised. But promises in Westeros were often broken. When Jon arrived at the ruined gates of King's Landing, the city was still smoldering. Blackened buildings stood like broken bones. Ash rained from the sky like snow. The people looked hollow, their eyes wide with fear. Soldiers marched through the streets, unsullied, silent and unshaken, patrolling what little was left. Drogon rested near the Red Keep, his wings casting long shadows over the ruins. Daenerys stood at the top of the steps, staring down from what remained of the Iron Throne's platform, though the throne itself had melted in the fire. Jon approached slowly, alone. She turned when she saw him, her silver hair messy from wind and fire, her face pale but fierce. There was something in her eyes, power, madness, and a strange kind of peace. "You came," she said, almost smiling. Jon stopped a few feet away. "You burned them, even after the bells rang. You burned the innocent." Her smile faded. "They followed Cersei. They chose her over me. Their silence was a crime. You said you wanted to break the wheel," Jon said, pain in his voice. "Not burn the whole damn city." She walked down a few steps, her voice trembling with passion. "I did what I had to. They'll fear me now. They'll listen. No more games. No more lies. A new world will rise from this ash, Jon. We'll rule it together." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "You're not a queen," he whispered. "You're a tyrant." Her eyes widened. Hurt flashed across her face, then fury. "And what are you then? A traitor? A coward hiding behind northern snow?" "I'm the shield for the people you promised to protect," he said quietly. In that moment, Daenerys knew. He wasn't going to join her. She stepped back, lifting her hand slightly as if to signal the guards. But Arya was faster. Like a shadow, she appeared behind one of the pillars, blade in hand. The Unsullied nearby dropped before they could even turn. Jon stepped forward, hand on his sword. "Don't do this, Dany." Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice was still sharp. "Then bend the knee. Love me, follow me, or burn with them." But Jon didn't kneel, and Daenerys finally understood that love, once lost, turns into something else, something colder, something final. As Drogon roared from afar, Jon and Arya moved. This was no longer about love. This was justice. Drogon roared again, louder this time. His massive wings stirred the ash on the ground like a blizzard of fire's memory. People nearby scattered. Even the Unsullied hesitated. The beast felt what was about to happen. He always had a strange connection to his queen's emotions. And now, her rage made the ground tremble. Daenerys stood tall on the scorched steps of the ruined Red Keep. Her eyes locked on Jon Snow. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath short, her hands trembling, not with fear, but fury. Jon's hand rested on the hilt of Longclaw, his knuckles white. Arya had vanished again into the shadows, somewhere behind the columns, watching, waiting. "You betrayed me," Daenerys said in a voice that cracked like ice breaking underfoot. "You broke my heart, Jon, and now you bring a stark blade to finish what love couldn't." Jon took one step closer. "You burned children in the streets. You turned the city into a graveyard. I'm not your enemy, Dany, but I can't let this continue." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "You always belonged in the north. With your precious wolves and snow and frozen honor, I offered you fire. I offered you the world." "I never wanted the world," Jon replied quietly. "Just peace, and you destroyed any chance of it." Suddenly, she shouted a command in Valyrian. The Unsullied stiffened. One of them raised a spear, aimed at Jon. But before the spear flew, a silent shadow moved behind the soldier. Arya slit his throat in one clean motion. Another fell, and another. Daenerys's eyes widened. "Your sister is an assassin now?" she spat. How fitting for a Stark, always lurking in darkness, never brave enough to face the truth. "I am the truth," Arya said, stepping into the open. Her dagger glinted in the dim light. "You're just a woman with too much power and no soul left," Drogon growled from above. The air grew hotter. Jon raised a hand to Arya. "No, let me do this." Arya hesitated, her eyes meeting his. Then she slowly stepped back. Jon walked up the steps slowly, stopping only a few feet from Daenerys. They were so close now. For a moment, it almost felt like everything could stop, that maybe she would see reason, that maybe he could still save her. "I loved you," he said softly. She blinked fast, tears threatening to fall but never quite reaching her cheeks. "Then stay. We can rule together, Jon. You don't need the North. You don't need her." He looked past her at the melted remains of the Iron Throne, at the broken castle, at the ash-filled sky. "No," he said. "I need my soul." And then, before she could speak another word, he stepped forward and stabbed her right through the heart. Daenerys gasped. Her mouth opened, but no words came. Just breath. Just shock. Her eyes searched his face, not in anger, but in sadness, as if she still hadn't believed he could do it. He held her as she sank to the ground. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." She died in his arms, just like her father had died at the throne he'd once ruled. The roar that followed wasn't just a sound, it was a scream of grief and fury. Drogon landed hard, shaking the stones of the Red Keep. He sniffed at her body, let out a cry that shook the sky, and turned to Jon. Jon didn't move. He dropped Longclaw. "Do it," he said to the dragon. "If you must." Drogon looked at him. For a moment it seemed he would burn Jon alive. Fire lit in the back of his throat, glowing orange and red. But then, with a sudden change of direction, Drogon turned his head and blasted fire at the Iron Throne instead. The throne melted completely. Then, with Daenerys' body in his massive claw, Drogon flew away into the smoky sky, disappearing into the clouds. Silence fell. Arya walked up beside Jon. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He had done what had to be done. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. Together they left the ruined castle behind. The city would recover. The people would rebuild. But the legend of the Dragon Queen, the Wolf King, and the fire that burned the throne, it would be whispered for centuries. Jon had killed the last Dragon Queen, but he had saved Westeros from becoming a kingdom of ashes. And in the cold halls of Winterfell, Sansa Stark waited. The North was ready to rise, not with fire but with wisdom. The snow had returned to Winterfell by the time Jon rode through its gates. No banners flew, no horns blew. There was no celebration for what he had done, only the cold silence of winter and the heavy weight of whispers. Everyone had heard the truth. Jon Snow had killed Daenerys Targaryen, the last Dragon Queen, the breaker of chains, the mother of dragons, and no one could agree whether he was a hero or a traitor. Arya rode beside him, quiet as ever, her face unreadable. Ghost ran ahead, his white fur stained from travel, but still loyal. Jon looked up at the old walls and towers of his childhood and felt a sharp ache in his chest. This place was home, but even home had changed. Inside the great hall, Sansa stood waiting. She wore a thick black and grey cloak lined with fur, and her crown of the North sat on her head, simple yet regal. When Jon stepped inside, their eyes met. For a moment, neither said a word. The room was nearly empty, save for a few guards and Maester Vulcan. Arya moved to the side, leaning against a pillar. She watched the two of them like a hawk. Sansa finally spoke, voice calm but cold. "You killed the Queen." Jon nodded once. "I had no choice." "You always have a choice, Jon," she said. "But sometimes it's the hard one." He looked at her, eyes tired. She was going to burn the world. I saw it in her eyes. I tried to save her, Sansa, but she wouldn't stop. Sansa stepped closer, her expression softening. "I know, Arya told me everything. You did what none of us could. You ended a war before it began." Jon exhaled, shoulders dropping. He hadn't realized until that moment just how much he needed her understanding, her approval. But the realm won't see it that way, she continued. Her loyalists will call you a murderer, and her enemies will use your name to stir fear. They'll say you're a kingslayer, just like Jaime Lannister. They'll say you wanted the throne for yourself. I don't want any damn throne, Jon said. I never did. I know, Sansa said quietly. But they won't care. There was silence again. Then Arya spoke from the shadows. Tyrion's missing. So is Varys' old scribe. Someone's stirring things in the south, letters, rumors, stories about Jon's true parentage, about the murder in the Red Keep. Jon's eyes narrowed. Who? No names yet, Arya said. But I'd bet gold it's one of Daenerys' surviving advisors. Maybe Grey Worm, maybe someone from Essos. They want revenge. Sansa stepped forward, her voice now hard as steel. We need to protect you, Jon. If the South rises against you, you'll be dragged into another war. Jon shook his head. I won't fight them. I've done enough killing. Then you'll die for nothing, Arya said bluntly. Sansa turned back toward her seat. There's another way. Let them have their throne. Let them squabble and bleed over it. We'll break free completely. The North will stand alone. You mean secession? Jon asked. Sansa nodded. Yes. The North will no longer bow to any king or queen in the South. We will be our own kingdom. And you can stay here, where you belong, with your family. Jon looked at her, surprised. You're offering me a home, after all I've done. You saved us, Jon, she said. Even when we didn't ask for it, even when it broke you. He turned to Arya. She gave a slow nod as if to say, You've earned your rest. Jon stood there between the two women who had shaped so much of his life. One a sister hardened by survival and sharpened by leadership. The other a shadow in the dark, deadlier than most kings. And he realized this was the throne that mattered, not made of swords and lies, but of blood and trust. He took a deep breath. All right, let the South burn itself out. I'll stay. I'll protect the North. Sansa gave a small, relieved smile. Then we begin again. But far in the south, in the ruined cities and broken courts, a new power was stirring. Whispers of a child, Daenerys' child, hidden before the war, protected in secret by loyalists. A blood heir to fire and flame. And across the sea, in the shadows of Essos, the Red Priests had begun to chant again. The dragon would rise, they promised. Fire had not died. It had only gone quiet. Jon Snow had brought peace to the north, but Westeros was not done with fire. Winter came hard that year. Thicker snow blanketed Winterfell's towers than ever before. The walls groaned under the weight of ice, and fires burned constantly in the great hall just to keep the cold from seeping into men's bones. But inside the castle, something else stirred. Quiet tension. Jon had returned a hero to some, a traitor to others. While the North stood with him, rumors from the South continued to spread like poison. Word had reached the gates. A new force was rising. Not a king, not a queen, a child. They called it the flameborn. Whispers claimed Daenerys had been pregnant before her death. That a loyal handmaid had spirited the child away during the chaos. No one knew where, but the Red Priests of Essos had taken notice. And now, across the narrow sea, the chant echoed in fire-lit temples. The dragon's heir lives. The fire shall rise again. At first, Jon thought it was just noise, politics, lies spun by desperate men trying to cling to a dead queen's memory. But then, the ravens stopped coming. Scouts sent south vanished. And one morning, Ghost returned with blood on his fur and no wounds, proof that something out there wasn't just rumor. In the war room, Sansa laid her hand on a map of Westeros, her expression grim. Arya leaned over the table, staring at a red-marked symbol near Dragonstone. They've regrouped here, Arya said. Red priests, old unsullied loyalists, and some mercenaries. A fleet is forming. They're not hiding anymore, Sansa nodded. If this child is real, they'll raise it like a god. Like the second coming of Daenerys. Jon said nothing for a long time. Then finally he muttered, I killed the mother to stop her from burning the world. I won't let the child finish what she started. Arya gave him a sharp look. You're not thinking of killing a child, are you? Jon's jaw clenched. I'm thinking of stopping a war before it begins. Whatever it takes, but Sansa stepped in. We don't even know if the child's real. We need proof, and we need someone who can walk among them, hear their plans. Before we act, Arya smirked. Then I suppose it's time I visit Essos again. She was gone the next night. No goodbyes, no promises. Just like always. The ghost in the snow. Days turned into weeks. Winter deepened. Jon tried to remain calm, to focus on the defense of the north. He trained with his men, rode the wall, walked among the people. But something inside him twisted every time he thought of the child. If it was real, what then? One night, he dreamed. In the dream, Daenerys stood in the Godswood. Not as she had died, angry, powerful, terrifying, but soft, almost gentle. Her silver hair fell across her face, her hands cradling a small infant. She looked at Jon with pain in her eyes. You couldn't save me. Will you damn my child too? Jon reached for his sword, but it turned to ash. The child began to cry, and the sky above turned red. Fire rained from the heavens, burning the weirwood trees, melting the snow. He woke up sweating, breath ragged. Ghost growled softly from the corner. The next morning the raven arrived. Arya's handwriting was sharp, quick, and cold. The child is real. A girl, barely a year old, hidden on Dragonstone, under the protection of Kinvara and the Red Temple. They call her Rhaenyra Storm. They've crowned her in fire. She doesn't cry when dragons scream. I've seen it myself. They mean to bring her to Westeros within the month. The lords of the Reach and Stormlands are already being courted. Some believe she is the true heir, a holy child, the flameborn. They want revenge, Jon, for Daenerys, for the throne. They don't just want a kingdom. They want you dead. Sansa lowered the letter slowly. Her voice was quiet. They won't stop until they wipe out the Starks. Until the North kneels again. Jon took the letter, staring at the ink. Then I'll go to Dragonstone. Sansa's eyes widened. Alone? I started this, Jon said. Let me end it. I'll speak to them, or fight them. Whatever it takes, Ghost growled again. The wind howled outside the walls. Winter was no longer the enemy. Fire had returned, and this time it wore the face of a child. The sea was cruel. Waves slammed against the sides of the ship like a warning. The sky hung heavy and grey, and the winds whispered things Jon couldn't quite understand, like the ghosts of all those lost to fire and war were calling out through the storm. He stood at the bow, cloak soaked through, hair whipping in the wind. His eyes locked on the rising shape in the distance. Dragonstone. It had changed. Black banners with a red flame sigil now flew from the towers. Not the three-headed dragon of House Targaryen, but a new symbol. A single flame rising from the ashes. The mark of the flameborn. Behind Jon, Sir Davos steadied himself against the rails. You sure about this, lad? You're walking straight into the heart of it. They'll see your face and remember their queen lying in your arms. I have to see her, Jon muttered. With my own eyes, Davos gave a weary sigh. You always had a taste for lost causes. By nightfall, they landed on the rocky shore. No guards stopped them. No arrows flew. It was almost too quiet. As they climbed the steps toward the keep, Jon saw red-robed priests standing along the path, holding torches, their faces expressionless. Chanting echoed softly, carried on the wind. The fire lives. The flame is reborn. The mother's wrath sleeps in her child. The gates opened without a word. Inside the throne room, Dragonstone had been transformed. The dark stone walls were covered in red silks, fire-shaped banners, and symbols of prophecy. At the end of the hall sat a woman on a modest seat, not a throne, but a platform draped in scarlet cloth, Kinvara, the high priestess of R'hllor. Her red eyes glinted in the torchlight as she watched Jon approach. Behind her stood the child, a little girl with pale silver hair, skin like snow, and violet eyes that pierced deeper than they should have. She sat quietly in the arms of a red priestess, cradling a small dragon-shaped toy carved from obsidian. Jon froze. She looked just like her mother. Kinvara rose. Jon Snow, the man who killed the Queen of Fire, the man who fled the south, only to become king of a frozen graveyard. I'm no king, Jon replied, his voice sharp. No? Kinvara stepped closer. Then why does your name still echo across the realm? Why do the gods continue to haunt your dreams? I came for the child, Jon said, eyes locked on the little girl. Is she really Daenerys's? She was born of fire, Kinvara said softly. Born as her mother died. The flame passed into her. We didn't steal her, Jon Snow. We saved her. You stole everything from her first. I spared the realm, Jon growled. Your queen burned thousands alive. That wasn't justice. That was madness. And who decides the difference? Kinvara snapped, her voice rising. You? The man who loved her and still drove a blade through her heart. Jon flinched. The guilt never left him. Not for a day. Not even in sleep. I came to make peace, he said. Let her live in peace. Raise her in the shadows. Don't turn her into a weapon. Kinvara tilted her head. It's too late for that. The people already believe. She's the child of prophecy, the flame that was promised. Westeros is breaking, Jon Snow. Old kings die. Old houses fall. And in that chaos, she will rise. She's just a girl. She's more, Kinvara whispered. She does not cry when near dragonfire. She does not flinch at screams. She dreams in tongues no one taught her. R'hllor has marked her. Jon stepped forward, ignoring the guards, staring at the child. Her violet eyes met his. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She just watched. She was calm. Too calm, he felt something stir inside. A chill not of cold, but of fate. She's dangerous, he muttered. Kinvara's voice softened. No, Jon, she's destiny. Suddenly the child raised her small hand. The torches in the room flared brighter. The flames curled higher, unnaturally as if pulled by her will. Jon staggered back. Davos swore under his breath. She's not ready, Jon said quickly. She's still a child. Don't force this on her. We don't have to, Kinvara said, smiling. She wants it. She remembers her mother's pain. And one day, she'll remember you. The implication hit Jon like a blade. One day, this child would learn who killed Daenerys, and then she would come for him. Jon turned to Davos. We're leaving. Kinvara didn't stop them. Neither did the guards. As he walked away, Jon glanced one last time at the girl. She stared after him, silent and cold. And though she couldn't speak yet, he swore he could hear her in his mind. You will burn, snow. The snow never stopped in Winterfell. It fell quietly, steadily, like time itself had slowed. But beneath the calm, war drums were starting to beat once again. Jon had returned from Dragonstone changed. He said little, but the weight in his eyes said enough. The fire had returned to the world, and it wore the face of a child who didn't cry in the presence of dragonfire. A child who had already begun shaping flames with her fingers before she could speak. A child who would grow into something terrifying. Sansa stood beside him on the battlements, the wind tugging at her red hair. So she's real, she said. Jon nodded slowly. She's not just real. She's dangerous. I could feel it. Then we kill her, Arya said bluntly from behind them. Jon turned to look at her. She stepped forward, face unreadable. We end it now while she's still a child. Before she learns what you did. Before she grows wings of her own. But Jon didn't answer. He stared out toward the trees, watching the snowfall coat the branches like white armor. Sansa finally broke the silence. We can't just assassinate a child. That makes us no better than the monsters we've fought. Arya gave her sister a hard look. You think she'll show us mercy when she's older? You didn't see her eyes, I did. There's no softness in her. She's not just Daenerys' daughter, she's fire reborn. Jon clenched his fists. She doesn't even speak yet, and you already want her dead. She doesn't have to speak, Arya snapped. She's already chosen. You saw what she did in that chamber. She lit those fires without flint, without spark. She wanted you to see it. Jon turned away, frustration rising like a tide. She's a child. Arya stepped forward, her voice like ice. And so was you once. And you were taught honor. She's being taught vengeance. That night Jon walked alone through the godswood, snow crunching under his boots. The old weirwood tree stood silent, its red eyes watching him like it remembered every death he carried. He kneeled. Father, I don't know what to do. I've killed a queen I once loved. I've broken oaths. I've brought peace. But now I stand at the edge of another war, one I never wanted. The wind answered with silence, until a soft voice broke the stillness. You can't protect them forever. Jon Snow, he turned, heart racing. There, beneath the tree, stood Melisandre, but no, it wasn't her. This figure looked younger, her red robes cleaner, her eyes brighter. And yet there was something timeless in her stare. You're dead, Jon said. You burned. I saw it. I did, the red woman replied, smiling faintly. But fire doesn't die. It only changes. What do you want? He asked. I'm here to warn you. Rhaenyra Storm is not just a girl. She is the Flame Reborn. The gods of fire chose her when Daenerys perished. And now they seek vengeance for her mother's blood and yours too. I didn't want this, Jon said. I didn't ask to be part of any prophecy. But you are, the red woman said. You are ice. She is fire. The realm will burn again unless one of you falls. Jon stood, anger building. She's just a baby. For now, she said, tilting her head. But the fire grows quickly. He stepped forward. Is there another way? There always is, she said. But it requires sacrifice. What kind? He asked. She didn't answer. When he blinked, she was gone. Only falling snow remained. Back in the great hall, Sansa had called a council. Lords of the North, old bannermen, and a few trusted friends had gathered. They were readying for war. We received word, she said. A ship was seen off the coast of Blackwater Bay, flying red sails. Ginvara's priests have landed. They're recruiting men with coin and flame. Some say they'll reach the Riverlands in weeks. Jon entered, boots echoing on the stone. Sansa turned to him. What did the red woman say? Jon looked around the room. Faces full of hope, fear, and confusion. She said we have a choice, Jon replied. Kill the child, or watch the world burn. And what do you choose? Sansa asked. Jon looked at Arya, then at the roaring hearth-fire in the hall, and finally at his sword. I choose the north, Arya smiled. Sansa nodded. Outside, the wind howled louder. Rhaenyra Storm was coming, and Jon Snow would be ready, even if it meant killing the last piece of Daenerys left in the world.